Our NFL training camp tour started on Wednesday, and first up, Florham Park, where the Jets begin a new regime led by first-year head coach Aaron Glenn and projected starter Justin Fields. And to break it down, we send it out to CBS Sports NFL reporter Aditi Kinkawala.
It was just day one out on the training camp field for the Jets, but practice was crisp, the energy was high, and that new culture that Aaron Glenn keeps talking about was on full display. The first-year head coach, after practice, minced no words in telling the media that he openly told his players yesterday the expectation, just like for everybody else, is to win a Super Bowl. But he said it starts with what's created at training camp. And at training camp, you could certainly see that the standards are different. Quinnen Williams told me that's been clear since Glenn came in the building. His brother Quincy Williams said expect a different type of practice. He said you'll see backs on backers, you'll see ones versus ones, and he said I can't wait. In fact, we saw at practice a corner blitz, something we didn't see much of when Robert Saleh was running the defense. Of course, for as much as we're talking about the defense, Justin Fields at quarterback is also a new piece here in Florham Park. Fields talked to us afterwards. He said this feels like a really good fit. He's excited about getting to build this new offense. And he's, of course, so pleased to have a familiar face in his Ohio State teammate, Garrett Wilson. Wilson said that Fields is exactly who he remembers from Ohio State, except that after the last few years, he's got a little bit of a chip on his shoulder, and he said maybe a little different look in his eye. When I asked Fields about that, he said it's fair, and he's certainly hoping that translates into something significant.
Thanks so much, Aditi, and it's been quite a long time that Jets fans can say they made it to the postseason. Look at that. It's been over a decade and a half. 15 years, people, the longest active playoff drought out of the NFL, MLB, NBA, and NHL. With that, we bring in CBS Sports NFL and NFL draft analyst Ryan Wilson and CBS Sports NFL writer Tyler Sullivan. And y'all, one key for a head coach to gain success, even if it's not always in the win column, is the buy-in from their players. So Ryan, I'll start with you. What do you think is the blueprint for Aaron Glenn to turn this gangrene culture around and get back to the postseason and more?
Hey, Chris. Hey, Sully. Good to see you guys. Yeah, the blueprint's pretty easy. All you do is bring everything that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes did in Detroit and bring it to New York. As Aaron Glenn comes home to the Jets team that he played for, you have to get the right players in the building, and they're going about doing that. Darren Muji, the first-year GM, has done a lot of good things in the offseason thus far. They had a really good draft, and I think it starts with the top. And, you know, Justin Fields came from Pittsburgh, and if you talk to Steelers former players, including our very own Brian McFadden, they will tell you that it starts and ends with Mike Tomlin getting that team motivated, because it's a pretty easy argument to make that that team probably should have averaged 6 or 7 wins the last 6 or 7 years in a post-Big Ben world. And every single year they win more games than they lose. And that's exactly what AG, with that mindset, and Darren Muji, the GM, are bringing to a Jets franchise, as we just saw on that graphic, Chris, that hasn't been to the playoffs since Rex Ryan and Mark Sanchez were on the payroll here. So Justin Fields does not have to do everything. They have a run game that's going to be really good, a young offensive line that should be good, and AG is going to get that defense playing back to the form it was in when they were dominated a couple years ago. So I don't want to say this team is close, but they're much closer than they were 4 or 5 months ago, and I think it's a pretty easy argument to make that they have a chance to be the second or third best team in this division as we sit here, because it's going to be wide open after the Buffalo Bills.
Yeah, I would agree with you, Ryan. I think that this team is a little bit closer than people might suggest. Again, all of it, I think, comes down to what we're going to see and what we're going to get out of Justin Fields. Is he going to be the NFL's latest version of Geno Smith, Baker Mayfield, or even Sam Darnold last year going to Minnesota? These late bloomer quarterbacks that just kind of need to find the right situation for them to really unlock their talent. And I think a lot is going to be made, and Aditi even kind of referenced it there, that the Fields-Garrett Wilson connection is something that we're obviously excited to see. Of course, those two playing together at Ohio State. But my main concern with the offense for the New York Jets is who is going to be that second option for Justin Fields in the passing game. Because if you look at that wide receiver position, it's pretty thin. It's like Allen Lazard and corpses of everybody else. It's really Garrett Wilson and then a bunch of nobodies. I think you got to try to find that number 2 option. I actually think it's going to be tight end Mason Taylor, their second-round pick out of LSU. I think he is someone to really pay attention to that Fields could lean on. Of course, Breece Hall out of the backfield. So those are the guys I'm keeping an eye on. That's the situation there. I think if the offense starts humming, this defense is talented enough to really shine. They were second in the NFL in yards per play allowed last season. That was tied with the Denver Broncos and only looking up to the Super Bowl champion Pittsburgh Steelers. So there's talent on this roster. Now we have to see if Aaron Glenn can get the most out of it.
Yeah, cannot wait to see if they're able to indeed get to the postseason for the first time since 2010. Now, over in Pennsylvania, Ryan Wilson's Steelers are filled with storylines. The 41-year-old Aaron Rodgers running the show at QB. You got DK Metcalf and Jalen Ramsey join the team via trades. What's the most intriguing storyline to you, though, Tyler?
I think right now it's Aaron Rodgers and how he's going to build his relationship with his pass catchers, because we have seen Aaron Rodgers change teams before and they all kind of look the same. They're all somehow all these former Green Bay Packers pop up out of nowhere and you're like, oh, wow, Randall Cobb is now a New York Jet. You have Alan Lazard, a New York Jet. Devontae Adams, a New York Jet. Well, I'm looking at this Pittsburgh Steelers pass catching group and I don't see a lot of former Packers. And as we saw last season, Aaron Rodgers really likes to go to those familiar targets, really to the point where Garrett Wilson was not that involved in the New York Jets offense. And so how is it going to look now with building that relationship with DK Metcalf, who the franchise traded for and signed to a massive deal? How does Pat Freiermuth get into the equation? How does Jonnu Smith mesh with Aaron Rodgers? So to me, that's the biggest thing, and why we're looking at Aaron Rodgers now. You know, he just came in over mandatory minicamp. He was able to build somewhat of a foundation, but over these next few weeks, I want to see Aaron Rodgers build a rapport with DK Metcalf, all of those pass catchers, because I don't think that there's any Green Bay Packers walking through this door.
Sully, I'm picking up what you're putting down there, and that list of the wide receiver room doesn't look much different than the wide receiver room in New York, and you could argue that it's not even as good. And that's why I think Aaron Rodgers needs to practice turning around and handing the ball off, because that run game is going to be critical to any success he's going to have as a 41-year-old. That's why they drafted Caleb Johnson in the 3rd round. They have Jalen Warren. They've moved on for Najee Harris. Arthur Smith loves 3 tight ends. He has that in spades on this roster, and he also loves running zone, and that's exactly what Caleb Johnson excelled at in Iowa. And in order to be an effective run team, let's talk about the 5 big guys in front of Aaron Rodgers and those running backs. They have to be on the same page, and this is going to be an absolute young group, and you see it here. All these guys, except for Isaac Seumalo, are on their rookie contracts. Broderick Jones is a former first-round pick. Troy Fautanu is their first-round pick from a year ago who didn't play because of an injury. And Zach Frazier and Mason McCormick played as rookies and played really well. Zach Frazier is arguably a first-round pick in any sort of 2024 redraft that you do. So they have to stay healthy, they have to be on the same page, and they have to be able to run block consistently to open things up for Aaron Rodgers and whoever's out there running routes alongside DK Metcalf and Pat Freiermuth, and hopefully last year's 3rd-round pick, Chris Roman Wilson, who was injured for much of the year. He has to step up in a world where George Pickens is now in Dallas.
Yeah, we will be watching the Steelers every single game, wondering if they're able to get to the Super Bowl, as it likely will be the final year of Aaron Rodgers' career. Now, for Cincy, the Bengals, the off-the-field drama, Ryan, isn't dying down with Trey Hendrickson and rookie Shamar Stewart both holding out. And QB Joe Burrow said it's disappointing to not have everyone out there. Tyler, I'll start with you. Do you think the Bengals get off to a better start this year if the contract drama continues in the background?
No, I don't. And so you have to look at the schedule and you say, okay, they have the Cleveland Browns in week 1. So, and that's in Cleveland. So maybe Joe Flacco can work some magic and pull off the upset. I think they win that game. But you look at the rest of the schedule here for the Cincinnati Bengals. They face the Jacksonville Jaguars at home. I don't know if Travis Hunter is what we think he's going to be and Trevor Lawrence rebounds. You never know. That could be a toss-up. But after that is where it gets really sticky over the first month of the season. At the Minnesota Vikings, at the Denver Broncos, 2 unbelievable defenses. And why I point out the defense is because if in any sort of way Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins, their high-priced trio, are limited in how they can move the football, I don't think they have the defensive personnel to shut down an opposing offense. Right now, we don't know about Trey Hendrickson. We don't know about Shamar Stewart. As much as we're talking about the drama around these guys and whether or not they'll sign their contracts, we need to see them on the field. That's what I'm concerned about. I'm not concerned about any distractions. I'm concerned about whether or not they have the personnel to stop NFL caliber offenses. Because last year they had Trey Hendrickson, who had 17.5 sacks, and they were unable to stop teams, and they were unable to win high-scoring football games. They had 2 losses where they scored 38 points, 3 losses when they scored 34 points or more, 4 when they scored 33 or more, and 6 losses when they scored 25 or more points. That's not sustainable. They need to have their star pass rusher and their first-round pass rusher in tow for us to talk about them in a playoff or Super Bowl conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I agree with everything that Sully just said. This defense is not better than it was a year ago. We just saw the graphic of all the issues they've had and the players they've released and the players that are angry that they have not been given what they felt like they're due, whether that's Trey Hendrickson or their first-round pick from just 6 weeks ago, Shamar Stewart, who remains unsigned. The biggest hole in this roster is at the edge rush position. So the Bengals are going to put their foot in the ground and say, you know what? We're going to try to win football games by angering our best edge rusher or by not signing them at all. And Sully just reeled off the stats of all the games that the Bengals lost by scoring 28 to close to 38 points a game. It could be a situation where this team averages 45 points a game and wins 6 football games because their defense can stop absolutely no one. And if I'm Joe Burrow or Jamar Chase or T. Higgins, I'm speaking up, and I'm speaking up loudly because I think if anyone can get the ball rolling on this, it's Joe Burrow and his frustration with scoring a bunch of points and this team still losing football games. They were a playoff team last year on paper. The defense didn't get out of their own way, and I can't live in a world, Chris and Sully, where it doesn't make sense to sign Trey Hendrickson. As a Steelers fan, I saw him terrorize that team every single snap that they played last season. So I don't know how the solution is not to get him back out there. I know he's north of 30. Guess who's also north of 30? T.J. Watt, and the Steelers just made him the highest paid edge rusher for obvious reasons. I don't understand the holdup, other than the fact that you're in Cincinnati and you're dealing with the Bengals front office.
Right. A bold strategy. Right, Cotton, as they say. Not sure if it's going to play out for the Bengals well, but we will keep our eyes glued and ears tuned up to see what happens with Cincy. Ryan Wilson, Tyler Sullivan, always a pleasure, guys. And getting you caught up on some other news around training camps. Another notable holdout between Terry McLaurin and the Commanders. Washington placed their star wideout on the reserve did not report list on Wednesday. Brian Dable announced that veteran Russell Wilson will be the Giants starting QB. No surprise there, at least for me. And some bad injury luck in Miami. The team fears that cornerback Artie Burns suffered a torn ACL at practice. He's going to have an MRI to determine the severity. The Dolphins are already thin at that position after dealing Jalen Ramsey to the Steelers last month.